So our topic is all about the Malolos Constitution of 1899, or the Political Constitution. It is the constitution of the first Philippine Republic and was written by Philip Calderon, Y. Roca, and Philip Buencamino as an alternative to a fair of proposals to the Malolos Congress by Apolinario Mabini and Pedro Paterno. And after the lengthy debate in the 1898, it was promulgated on January 21, 1899.
Writers of the Malolos Constitution: Felipe Calderon, Y. Roca, and Felipe Buencamino.
Who do you think is Felipe Calderon? Felipe Calderon was a politician and known as the father of the Malolos Constitution for his role as author of the Constitution of the First Philippine Republic. He's also a lawyer, social scientist, writer, politician, and revolutionary leader. In 1904, he was appointed member of a commission to draft a proposed penal code. He also organized the La Protection de la Infancia, or in English, the protection of infants. That established a humanitarian institution to protect and care for the disadvantages of children. The Constitution was finally proclaimed at Malolos on January 25, 1899. This was the most momentous period of his life, for it was he who drafted the Malolos Constitution. But then, he died because of cholera in St. Paul's Hospitals on July 6, 1908 at about 10 o'clock in the morning.
Felipe Siojo Buencamino Sr. was an infamous turncoat Filipino lawyer and politician. He fought alongside the Spaniards in the Philippine Revolution, but later switched sides and joined Emilio Aguinaldo's revolutionary cabinet. He was a member of the Malolos Congress and co-authored the Malolos Constitution. He was also appointed as Secretary of Foreign Relations in the cabinet of Aguinaldo. After he left the revolutionary government, he co-founded the Federal Party and became a founding member of the Philippine Independent Church. After the signing of the truce, the Filipino revolutionary leaders accepted a payment from Spain and went to exile in Hong Kong. The Spanish and American War. Battle of Manila Bay, Spanish, Batalla de Bahia de Manila or Filipinos, laban sa Looc ng Maynila, May 1, 1898, Fred S. Cousins, also known as the Battle of Cavite, took place on May 1, 1898 during the Spanish-American War. The Spanish-American War was a period of armed conflict between Spain and the United States. Hostilities began in the aftermath of the internal explosion of USA's main in Havana Harbor in Cuba, leading to United States intervention in the Cuban War of Independence. The war led to the United States emerging predominant in the Caribbean region and resulted in U.S. acquisition of Spain Pacific possessions. It led to United States involvement in the Philippine Revolution and later to the Philippine-American War. Upon the defeat of the Spanish to the American in the Battle of Manila Bay, the United States Navy transported Aguinaldo back to the Philippines. The newly reformed Philippine Revolutionary Forces reverted to the control of Aguinaldo, and the Philippine Declaration of Independence was issued on June 12, 1898, together with several decrees that formed the First Philippine Republic. The Malolos Congress was elected, which selected a commission to draw up a draft constitution on September 17, 1898, which was composed of wealthy and educated men.
General Aguinaldo sat at center and 10 of the delegates to the first assembly that passed the Constitution in Baraso Church, Malolos. The document they came up with, approved by the Congress on November 29, 1898, and promulgated by Aguinaldo on January 21, 1899, was titled the Political Constitution of 1899 and written in Spanish. Written in Spanish, Constitution has 39 articles divided into 14 titles with 8 articles of transitory provision and final additional articles. So, the document was patterned after the Spanish Constitution of 1812 with influences from the characters of Belgium, Mexico, Brazil, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Guatemala, and French Constitution of 1793. So, the Malolos Constitution, written by the Congress, was proclaimed on January 22, 1899, creating as it's known as the first Philippine Republic with Aguinaldo as its president. The Constitution was approved by delegates to the Malolos Congress on January 20, 1899 and sanctioned by Aguinaldo to the next day.
According to Felipe Calderon, main author of the Constitution, these countries were studied because they shared similar social, political, ethnological, and governance conditions with the Philippines.
Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, classmates. I am Janet Iscaran from Base Ed 1A. For today's, I'm going to discuss about the project in the Philippines, also influence the Malolos Constitution. First is Cartilla. Cartilla means serve as the guidebook for new members of the organization, which laid out the group's roles and principles. Second is Sangguniang Hukuman or the Supreme Court. Supreme Court was established by the Second Philippine Commission on June 11, 1901. Through the enactment of this Act number 136. The third is the Character Charter of Laws and Morals, the Katipunan, written by Emilio Jacinto in 1986. Was to gain complete separation or independence from Spain through civil, political, and moral objectives. So for now, the three sentences continued by Jameline Alawasi.
Ma'am, I'm Jameline Alawasi. The Biak na Bato Constitution of 1897, planned by Isabelo Artacio. The Biak na Bato Republic lasts just over a month. He was provided for creation of Supreme Council to serve as the supreme body of the Republic government. He also describes some fundamental human rights such as freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and the right to government. Next is Mabini's Constitutional Program of the Philippines Republic of 1898. The Mabini's Constitutional Program of the Philippines Republic 1898, among the more iconic documents that lead out the foundations of the Philippines Republic. And lastly, the provisional Constitution of Mariano Ponce in 1893 that followed the Spanish Constitution. The so-called Malolos Congress was tasked with drafting the constitution of the Provisional Constitutions of Mariano Ponce 1898.
As a direct challenge to colonial authorities of the Spanish Empire, the sovereignty was reverted to the people, a legal principle underlying the Philippine Revolution. The people delegated governmental function to civil servants while they retained actual sovereignty. The 27 articles of Title IV detail the natural rights and popular sovereignty of Filipinos, the enumeration of which does not imply the prohibition of any other rights not expressly stated. Title 3, Article 5 also declares that the state recognizes the freedom and equality of all beliefs, as well as the separation of church and state. These are direct reaction to features of the Spanish government in the Philippines, where the friars were dominant agents of the states. The form of government, according to Title II, Article 4, is to be popular, representative, alternative, and responsible, and shall exercise three distinct powers, which is legislative, executive, and judicial. The legislative power was vested in a unicameral body called the Assembly of Representatives, members of which one elected for terms of 4 years. Secretaries of the government were given seats in the assembly, which meet annually for a period of at least 3 months. Bills could be introduced either by the president or by a member of the assembly. Some powers, not legislative in nature, were also given to the body, the right to select its own officers, right of censure and interpellation, and the right of impealing the president, cabinet members, chief justice of the Supreme Court, and the solicitor general, a permanent commission of 7 elected by the assembly and granted specific power by the Constitution, was to sit during the intervals between session of the assembly. Executive power was vested in the president and elected by a constituent assembly of the Assembly of Representatives and Special Representatives. The president will serve a term of 4 years without re-election. There was no vice president, and in case of a vacancy, a president was to sit during the intervals between sessions of the assembly.
The 27 articles of Title 4 detail the natural rights and popular sovereignty of Filipinos. The Title 3, Article 5 declares that the state recognizes the freedom and equality of all beliefs as well as the separation of church and the state. Title 2, Article 4, the form of government is to be popular, alternative, and responsible and shall exercise their distinct powers, legislative, executive, and judicial.
The Republic had 3 branches of government. Number 1, legislative. It has a power to elect the President and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Executive. He was the head of the state and was duty elected by the legislative body. Judicial. The judicial power was vested in the Supreme Court and all other lower court provided by law. The legislative. All legislative power in the government is settled in Congress. It is the only part of the government that can make new laws or change existing laws. And the executive. The president is responsible for implementing and enforcing the laws written by Congress, and to that end, appoints the heads of the federal agencies, including the cabinet. The vice president is also part of the executive branch, ready to assume the presidency should need arise. And the main role of the executive branch is to enforce the nation's laws. And the judicial power rests with the Supreme Court and the lower courts. Excuse me. As established by law, Article 8, Section 1 of the 1987 Constitution. Its duty is to settle actual controversies involving rights which are legally demandable and enforceable. The judiciary plays a fundamental role in society and for the upholding of social order. Its primary function, in fact, it is to resolve conflicts through the application of the pre-existing norms, or in some cases precedents, which have been issued through legitimate procedures as recognized by the political system.
The 1899 Malolos Constitution was never enforced due to the ongoing war. The Philippines was effectively a territory of the United States upon the signing of the Treaty of Paris between Spain and the United States, transferring sovereignty of the Philippines on December 10, 1898.
The Treaty of Paris of 1898, Filipino kasunduan sa Paris ng 1898. Spanish Tratado de Paris de 1898 was a treaty Spanish by Spain and the United States on December 10, 1898 that ended the Spanish-American War.
Among its conditions was the cession of the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico to the United States. Cuba was granted its independence. In return, the United States would pay Spain the sum of $20 million. The nature of this payment is rather difficult to define. It was paid neither to purchase Spanish territories nor as a war indemnity. In the words of historian Yun Wolf, it was a gift. Spain accepted it. Quite irrelevantly, she handed us the Philippines. No question of honor or conquest was involved. The Filipino people had nothing to say about it, although their rebellion was thrown in, so to speak, or free to charge.